Good morning. I'd like to thank Dave for the introduction, but in particular thank Bob and the ARF for allowing us this opportunity to talk about one of my passions in developing economies. But I'd also like to thank Bob for 10 years of great leadership in the industry and phenomenal contributions to the whole area that we call, beyond obviously advertising research, but insights into customers, consumers, and emerging markets. Thank you for all your contributions that you made over the last 10 years. I want to do a quick poll. This is a marketing research group, right? How many people were in the bar after 10 o'clock last night? Not very many. I think there's a segmentation here. I can't believe the bars were empty after midnight, but I do appreciate you guys coming here and choosing to listen to me rather than staying in the bar after 10 o'clock. So we're going to talk about winning the $30 trillion decathlon. Oh, sorry, one other thing. Yuval unfortunately could not make it here. Something came up with a client at the last minute, so I apologize on his behalf. He comes from the London office, so when we were pulling together this report, they were full of Olympic fever, so the whole notion on the decathlon. The decathlon, as you all know, is, the winner of that is crowned the world's greatest athlete, and they compete over 10 events. And you don't have to be best in all 10, you just have to be best across all 10 events. And that's an interesting analogy because one is, this is a huge, huge opportunity, $30 trillion of opportunity in emerging markets. I don't know any company that's not interested in growing. Everyone I talk to with my clients is very interested in how to make this work. There are 10 crucial capabilities that we think companies need to have to win. Our goal for the gold here, I will briefly touch on 7 of them and go deeply into 3 others. And I will also then talk a little bit about what the opportunities we see for us in the insights world, be it people who work within client organizations for us, or manufacturing organizations, or service companies, or people working on the agency side. And I'll try not to steal all of Matthias and the panel's thunder. I'll leave him a little bit of opportunity. So let me first, it's a research group, I forgot. I'll let you tell a little bit about methodology. A lot of this analysis was done by the McKinsey Global Institute. MGI is our global think tank that looks at issues like green, like carbon taxes. It also looks at growth. And I'll share with you some of the analysis that they've been doing, looking at where the growth opportunities are in emerging markets. We also do a lot of marketing research ourselves. And over the last couple of years, we have done about 50,000 interviews throughout China, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, 12 countries in Africa, Latin America, to help us get a pulse on what's going on in this very exciting and fast-changing world. And I obviously won't have time to share with you a lot of that, but I'll share with you some tidbits. But let's jump right in. Oh, thank you. If you look at the growth over the next 15 years, 3/4 of the global growth is going to come from emerging markets. It's a phenomenal number. This is looking at gross domestic product and look at where the expected growth rates are going to come. Huge amount of places. McKinsey did another study, I love this study, called The Granularity of Growth. One of the major conclusions of it is it's easier to grow when you're in markets that are growing. That's kind of the duh moment for me at McKinsey, I'll say it again, it's very profound. It's easier to grow where the markets are growing than where markets aren't. And so if you're looking to grow, you've got to figure out how to make that work. By the way, if you also look at GDP, over half of the world GDP, if you're looking at the world 2025, will be in emerging markets. So it's growing fast, and it's huge. If you then just focus on consumption, this is where the 30 trillion come out. There'll be 30 trillion of consumption in emerging markets by the year 2025. And yeah, usually we hear China 8 trillion, India 3, Brazil 3. The BRICS, the so-called BRICS, the top 4, they're about half of that. On the other side, about half of that's coming from the non-BRICS, right? Coming from the Mexicos, coming from Indonesia, Turkey, other countries like that. And if you actually drill down and look at the so-called new emerging middle class, Middle class in emerging markets tends to mean those people that actually are coming out of subsistence, and they actually can spend money on products. More than half of the opportunity is coming from the non-BRICS. So it's something to look at beyond those four. The amazing thing about this is not only the scale, which is huge, but the speed in which this is happening. We did some analysis looking and equating back to purchase parity and how long it took countries to go from $1,300 in per capita GDP to $2,600. And it took the UK over 150 years to do that. It took the US about 50, Germany about 60, you can read that. China and India are forecast to do that in 10 and 16 years. Just an amazing, fast doubling of per capita GDP. And the scale, just to give you some notion of scale, you know how large China and India are in terms of their population. To put it in perspective, the UK population at the beginning of that was 9 million people, right? We're talking about billions of people as opposed to 9 million people. It's unbelievable in terms of the economic force that's coming, is coming up in emerging markets. We don't think a lot of the leading companies are taking full advantage of this. This is probably a little unfair at this point. I'm glad my virus is going to expire in 30 days. I was worried about that. If you look at the worldwide, 36% of GDP right now is happening in emerging markets. If you look at the developed companies that are in the developed countries, 17% of the revenue is coming from there. If you look at it, North America, the comparable, it's 26% of the GDPs right now in North America. Companies that are resident here, 39% of the revenue, is North American centric. This is probably a bit unfair because a lot of this is emerging, but I think there are a lot of companies that haven't figured out quite yet how to do emerging markets, and there I think lies in the opportunity for many of you in this room to try to help them. It's not easy to do. Right? There are lots of stories about success stories. There are lots of stories about failures, right? People being in China for a long, long time without making any money, right? It says 30 trillion is a big number, but hey, John, it's scattered over hundreds of countries, right? Which have different infrastructures, have different regulations, right? Have different cultures, right? Have different religions, right? And yes, that's all true, but there are, I think, some opportunities, and this is where the opportunities are for us to help. So let me then turn to the 10 crucial capabilities. Bob is starting to look a little nervous now. I have 22 minutes left, and if I'm going to go through all 10 of them, I'm going to be speed dating through all 10 of them. I'm going to speed date through 7 of them, and then do deeper dives into 3. I actually think insights can help on all of these, but I did want to take some time to focus on 3 of them. So let me start with the ones I'm not going to talk much about, which is like number 3, the proverbial think local, or think global, act local. You've, I'm sure, heard this before. It's been around for a while. For me, the interesting thing in marketing is I was always taught to look for differences, right? You get the crosstabs, you look to see where the high ones are and the low ones here. For the global opportunities, you're actually looking for similarities. What are similarities in terms of globally that you can use to help your global scale if you're a global company? Understand you need to execute locally. And so let me leave you with that. 5, on innovation to deliver value across the price spectrum. Affordability really, really does matter in these countries, a lot more than it does here. And it works in ways that actually would surprise you, and maybe you've already seen if you've done research there, in ways that people are willing to spend in certain places a lot more than you think they would. And they're also not willing to spend in other places. 6, control the route to market in a multi-channel world. What this means is obviously there's the modern trade, and a lot of my clients are very good in the modern trade. There's also the traditional trade, the bodegas of Latin America, the paras in Indonesia, right? And how do you succeed in that? The other thing which we could take 30 minutes or more to talk about is the digital world and the mobile world is exploding much, much faster in these markets. And there's huge opportunity also within that in terms of brand building and increasingly in terms of commerce. 7, in terms of redeploying resources dynamically, it's a little bit of of investing where the growth is, right, or going where the growth is, right, from our study. We also did another study looking at corporate finance and how companies reallocated their investments. And we found the ones that did it much more dynamically, that really understood where the pockets of growth were and shifted their money around much more thoughtfully, grew faster, as opposed to the people that kind of did the same thing year after year and kind of shifted things minorly. So one thing I'll leave with you. Organize today for markets of tomorrow. How do you structure for this? This is not only how you structure a company, then how does the insights function within an organization structure? We're talking to lots of companies about that. Yeah, it's fine. China's a big place. You can probably put someone in China. Should you put someone in Indonesia? Right? Should you put someone in Malaysia? Very complicated. Could be some opportunities for some global agencies that have presence in there to help support within these regional companies. Deliver leadership, talent, and capabilities. Talent is a big issue out there. It's very hard. With everything growing so fast, the talented people are in very, very high demand. Again, opportunities for us in the industry to try to make sure we have the right kind of talent in place to support some of these opportunities. And lastly, to secure support from key stakeholders. This is companies really have to really work with government and regulators, a lot more than they might have to over here. They probably still should be doing it over here too, particularly if you're in the healthcare industry. But this is really a big deal in developing countries. But let me then focus on the three that I like to take a little more time on. And thank you. One is to anticipate a moment of explosive growth. This is all growing really fast, but some categories are really taking off, and are you well positioned to be there to get that growth? Second, to target urban growth clusters, and I'll talk about, again, where we see some of the growth coming. And lastly, there are many different ways to build brands that resonate and inspire trust, and sometimes it's not a liability to be a foreign brand. But let me start with the first one. And what is, in terms of anticipating moments of explosive growth, right? What typically many people do is follow others into this kind of fast-growing markets. They see it fast-growing, then they jump in. By that time, lots of times, that's too late. Can you recognize discontinuities which drive this rapid growth? And discontinuities come from a bunch of different things, some of which we recognize, some we don't. It does come from demographics and income. What's the population mix? How many young people do you have? How fast is income growing? It certainly comes from needs. We know a lot about this in the research world. But do we need to worry a little bit more about culture? Do we need to worry about national pride? Do we need to worry more about religion? Probably yes. There are other things like regulation that do impede some of this, so companies need to be mindful of that. This could be trading rules, taking products in and out of the country. It could be capital rules as well, ownership rules, what you can own within the company. I literally did an entry strategy from one client into a developing country, and 6 months later, the government passed a law basically banning that product, right? They didn't have their infrastructure done right. Technology, talked about mobile technology, that's really expanding things. And lastly, infrastructure. What are the roads like? What is the energy like? If you spend a lot of time in India like I do, you know the infrastructure needs a lot of help. But let me take a look at this. This again, on some of this explosive growth, obviously if you're in the industry, looking at this, it looks like a Bath's diffusion model, and we find lots of evidence of that. I won't, that there's a warm-up zone, right? At some point you get this hot zone where there's really explosive growth, and then you get more into the chill-out area, or where you have more of established, mature markets. Unfortunately, we don't have 20 years of data to really analyze this the proper way, but we did look across many categories and looked at household at different countries, right? So this is a scatter plot of refrigerators in red, washing machines in yellow or orange, with household penetration by country and looking at per capita income at the bottom, and just seeing what kind of plots these look like. We've done this over hundreds and hundreds of different categories. They all look reasonably similar. The question is, are you well positioned, or are our clients well positioned to be ready for the takeoff points and help that grow, and then willing to shift how they do marketing when you get into saturation, right? So we could look at this and say, okay, we know about consumer insights. They're more likely first to probably buy a refrigerator than a washing machine. I kind of get that, right? But what are the things that we can do to help proactively drive this rather than letting this happen to us? How can we push more countries to get to the takeoff points and really drive the curve more like refrigerators and more like saturation, right? And there could be lessons in just some of these different countries, right? Because if you look, up by the saturation point for refrigerators, there's a yellow dot up there. There's some country which has really bought into washing machines a whole lot earlier than others. What's happening there? Was there something that happened in the infrastructure, something that happened with needs? What were the barriers that they overcame that maybe we can apply that into other different countries? Those seem to be some things that we in the research world know how to address. Other things can be called by needs, and needs by what's going on within the country. With the fertility rate in China going way, way down with their one-child policy, you wouldn't have thought that baby food would be a growth category. Prepared baby food is one of the fastest growing categories in the supermarket. A lot of this stemmed from the food poisoning incidents and the milk scandal, which led people to obviously want some safer food for their babies. And so were you well positioned to grow? It's 90% growth in 5 years. It's growing 15% a year. I think it's a phenomenal market. So second, let me talk about targeting urban growth areas. The usual thing is for companies to be organized and look at their business plans by business unit and country. Here's my China. I have a country China manager, all these kinds of things. That's fine. We think a lot of the high growth opportunities are happening at the city level and the city cluster level, right? Remember, go where the growth is. Let me show you some data we have on this and something we did called City Scope. 440 cities in emerging markets will account for almost half of the growth over the next 15 years. 440 cities. It's not countries, cities, right? And this is due to urbanization, right? As people come into the cities, it's also due to increasing income within those city environments. So what's your city plan, right? Go where the growth is in the cities. Now, because 27% of the growth will be outside those 440 cities in the regions and other countries. By the way, another 160 cities in developed markets account for 17% of the growth. So it's like 600 cities, account for much of the growth that's happening over the next 15 years, right? Now, let me just give you some of the figures about that. If you take a look at the top 15 countries or cities in China, it's not just Shanghai and Beijing, it's many other ones. This growth is over $1.6 trillion. It's equivalent of enough another South Korea over the next 5 years, with a population 10 million more than Russia. This is not just China, though. If you look at 20 cities outside of China, Delhi, Mumbai, Sao Paulo, Mexico City, Istanbul, Lima, growth $1.2 trillion, equivalent of a new Indonesia. The population, if you put them all together, is 6th biggest in the world. So lots and lots of growth opportunities within those cities. Now, cities, you say that may be a lot of cities. One strategy that we've helped clients with is to think about a city cluster approach, where you could group China, we happen to group it into 22 city clusters. We did this by looking at demographics. We look at some of their behaviors, their needs, the media markets, transportation links, and what have you to come up with this. You say, well, 22 is a lot. On the other hand, Shanghai right now is the equivalent of a Switzerland, right? Beijing's equivalent of a Belgium. Shandong, equivalent of a Norway. Guangzhou, Denmark. Of course, you'd have a Danish strategy. Would you forget Denmark, right? So why can't we do the same in China? And in fact, many companies in the U.S., we have regional strategies and what have you. It's very equivalent there, right? And so some of the, just a, kind of a straightforward example, right? Depending on, this happened to be in shower gel. In one of the clusters we looked at, in Beijing, it's actually a highly developed market. People have already switched over from bar soap over to gels. You would do like you would do in any mature market, right? You make sure your brand's working properly, you're maintaining distribution, you're proliferating SKUs, that kind of thing. But in cluster 3 down in Fuzhou, right, which is a bar soap market, you're trying to grow and you're trying to convert people. So this is all about, do you have distribution? Can you gain trial? Do you have affordability packs, right? One kind of use things that you can sell in traditional markets to get at some of the new middle class or the people who can't afford to buy the big containers. And so you need to think about it very differently to go after this growth. And then lastly, building brands that resonate and inspire trust. And yeah, this is all about taking existing brands and communicate, customizing maybe the communication, maybe changing some of the targets, and positioning. Mercedes-Benz targets older people in the US than they do in China. But what is winning performance? There are other ways to develop brands and use some of the brands through local insights. I'll take you through a very small section of what we have on that. There is a lot of opportunity in mobile and the digital space, which I don't have time to talk about. But first, a lot of these consumers are actually more influenceable, right? We asked people in a lot of our research, do you get recommendations from family and friends before making purchases? And the numbers in general are a lot higher than the US and the UK. This is a flag recognition test, this late into the talk. That's India at 92%, China at 71%, Nigeria at 49%, South Africa at 46%, and I'm sure you all recognize Indonesia at 44%. Second, that though is, say in China we ask people, I find myself leaving the store with a different product or brand than I purchased because of the suggestion of the in-store salesperson. In China, people agreeing to that is 45% compared to 24% in the US. There's a lot more ability in store to influence people. And then if you spend a lot of time in some of the traditional trades, like in the bodegas, and observe some of it, I don't have data on this, observe some of that, the bodega owner is asked all the time, what about this brand and what have you? So unlikely places, but in-store advice is much easier to give there. There is some notion on foreign brands. This does change all the time, so you have to watch it. But China, this is Chinese data. Chinese preference for foreign brands does vary by category. Much higher preference in things like electronic devices, electrical appliances, that kind of thing, and lower in beverages and household. The kind of decent news, perhaps, for foreign brands, which they can leverage, is if you look at this on the kind of a mass consumer versus new mainstream consumers have a higher preference right now for foreign brands. The definition of mass is something around $15,000 annual income. It's more like $25,000, $30,000 for new emerging mass. So that could be good for foreign brands. But a lot of the mass people are becoming new mainstream. So the question always is, when we look at cohorts, do they take their brand preferences with them or not? But I think there is an opportunity there for our clients and our foreign brands, and certainly no resistance to it, at least in China. But this does change all the time. When we started doing the research 6 years ago, foreign brands were much more popular than they are now. Several years later, it was all about Chinese brands. I think some of what's happening there has made it more of a mixed position. Let me skip this. Let me then spend a few minutes then on what we think are opportunities for insights and opportunities for us in the insight world, and things that I've seen, because I think we need to think more expansively of what we are as an industry, and think expansively of how we add value in insights to top managers, CMOs, or other people who are making decisions. And this could be for people who are working inside organizations. I think there's equally opportunity for people working outside and supply and working in agencies and supplying help for them. And I'll spend, this is just a few ideas. We'll spend the rest of the morning on this, or at least the next 2 hours, in terms of how to think about doing research insights in different ways. I think there are opportunities for broader services than what we traditionally say, at least in the developed world. And I think new ways to think about supporting And I'm thinking about supporting top management and the kind of decisions that they need to make, in these emerging markets. So if I start with the research insights, there really are cultural differences and religious differences. Yes, Malaysia is mostly a Muslim country, and that means there's certain things you just cannot do there, and you have to do things differently. And it's easy to forget when you're doing a global survey and you want everything to be consistent and you want to use the same methodology. Yeah, but you're not going to do anything online in India, trust me, right, at this point. And also in terms of generating the insights, a lot of the cultural things you need to understand from a cultural context, how they think about things, and there are differences that it's important for us to figure out. As I mentioned, affordability in designing new products really is different. If you do a segmentation, you can find people that are very rich and very poor who have the same high-level needs. How you deliver those needs, right, and what you can afford to do in terms of delivery to those needs and what they can afford to pay, very, very different. But it does lead, I think, to opportunities and innovation, and you do hear about some of these innovations now are coming back to the US in lower cost, really good products over here. It is absolutely happening. And then the true competitive set. It just could be very different. We'll go back to washing machines, right? The competitive set for washing machines might be they just outsource their laundry, right? And so they don't want to buy one themselves. They just give it to someone, it disappears and comes back clean. Or it could be the competitive set is, I might buy a washing machine, but I actually might rather have a new cell phone, right? They think about things obviously very differently, than traditionally in developed markets just because of the circumstance and where they are. And your understanding what those trade-offs are, I think, becomes very, very important. Category forecasting by city. I hope, if you see from the data, is there an opportunity to do forecasting by city clusters in China? Absolutely, right? What we know about forecasting, right? We do this all the time. Why can't we pull together something to help our clients with, in terms of that? These markets are very, very versatile. Someone came to me and they said, I really want to understand whether Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, is going to be a great opportunity for me this year, as it's been for the last several years, or it could be a disaster like it was 5-10 years ago. Markets swing that fast. Understanding all barriers of adoption. Why can't we have a perspective on all 5 of those circles I showed you before? Yeah, I got the needs. Yep, we can do the demographics. If we're present in these areas, we probably know something about the infrastructure. We can probably gather something together on regulation, right? We could probably come up with perspectives on that to help them understand more holistically what the whole areas of barriers to adoption are and help our clients through that. Plus, can we also provide rapid response in-country events? Could we understand what's going on with food poisoning in China, how that affects what people are purchasing, how they're thinking about it, right? And help our clients respond to that quickly if they're not in position to do that. Or on the positive side, the Olympics was a terrific event, right, to pile onto, and are we taking advantage of that? And then lastly, local presence, in key cities. I'm just amazed at the amount of senior executives that I see that go to China and they go to Shanghai. Going to Shanghai is like going to New York, right? It's a wonderful place. I really love going to Shanghai. It doesn't show them what the rest of the country is all about, what the other city clusters are. And we basically take some of these CEOs and say, let's go to Fuzhou, right? Let's go to Chengdu. Let's not only go to Beijing, let's go to Nanjing, right? And really see what this looks like. Let's go take you into more traditional areas, right? And show you what this is all about. It is eye-opening to them, right? But that's what we're supposed to do to generate insights, right? And you all could, come together. You all could come up with perspectives on what some of these different areas and cities look like. High-quality talent, broader skill set. People in Asia get asked, our people in Asia get asked to do a lot more than they would over here, right? It's hard to have specialized skills because they're like utility infielders, right? They're expected to do anything. What I've talked about is probably even broader than having, research skills, right? Having more business sense and what have you, which is hard enough here, very hard to do over there. But I think there's a real opportunity for that. and maybe opportunity for on the agency side, right? Because just there may not be economies of scale for a company to do that given their scale right now, but there may be some opportunities in terms of that. Yeah, we need to take a hard look at ourselves though and say, is my talent, if I'm a global agency, is my talent in Malaysia as good as it is in Germany? It may need to be better in Malaysia than in Germany. And lastly, I think something we can do, how we come up with innovative ways to storytelling, right? Emerging country insights to develop countries' executives, right? Not everyone's going to want to go to Nanjing, right? But how do you convince some senior executive, sitting here in Park Avenue or sitting here in New York, how do you show them what it's really like to be in the new emerging middle class, in Brazil, right? Or in Indonesia, right? Or even in India, right? There's a lot of storytelling. We know how to do that, right? We know how to storytell, right? We can probably put together these perspectives and take this to them and really help them understand what's really going on in these people's lives and how that means how they should think about marketing and communicating their brands to them. So I hope in the short period of time I have convinced you that there's a huge opportunity in the developing markets. It's not easy to go after. I won't pretend that it is, but I think that provides great opportunities for us here in this room as an insight community to help our senior executives capture that opportunity and help them go for the gold or maybe the silver or maybe the bronze in the decathlon. Thank you very much.